Our distinguished speaker today is Valerie Yancey. Dr. Yancey is the recipient of the Siue Teaching Excellence Award, the most prestigious teaching honor a faculty member can receive at our university. Dr. Yancey is Associate Professor, Primary Care and Health Systems Nursing in the School of Nursing. Dr. Yancey holds undergraduate degrees in English and Education from Valparaiso University, as well as undergraduate and graduate degrees in nursing from St. Louis University. Her doctorate in American Studies from St. Louis University focused on religion and healthcare ethics. A nurse educator for 30 years, Dr. Yancey simultaneously maintained her practice as a bedside nurse in the burn unit and medical intensive units for 25 years at Barnes Jewish Hospital at Washington University Medical Center in St. Louis. From 2001 to 2003, she held a position as clinical specialist in palliative care to improve care at the end of life in the medical intensive care unit. Her areas of publication and teaching include nursing ethics, palliative care, spirituality, death and dying, and stress management. She holds certifications in critical care nursing, holistic nursing, hospice and palliative care nursing, and stress management. Dr. Yancey also is actively involved in national efforts to develop support networks for returning veterans within faith communities. In fact, Welcome Them Home, Help Them Heal, a book by Dr. Yancey co-authored about the spiritual care of veterans returning from war, won the distinguished Ben Franklin Award from the Independent Book Publishers Association for the Best Religious Book of 2010. Please join me in welcoming the 2010 Teaching Excellence Award recipient, Dr. Valerie Yancey. Congratulations again, Valerie.
Thank you, Chancellor. It's both an honor and a privilege to speak to you this afternoon. Every few years, the National Center for Health Statistics publishes and provides us with a list of the leading causes of death in our country. And it's enough in the public domain that I can imagine most of you would be able to list those. And those of us in healthcare, of course, then devote the rest of our lives treating, managing, modifying, addressing those things that threaten human life. What if, every now and then, we got a list of the leading causes of life? What if we were interested as students and faculty and citizens to address and inculcate those things in which we can participate that cause life? I decided in speaking about the leading causes of life, the best place to go, and you heard from my resume, I hang out with people who are fighting for their lives, people who walk right between the line of life and death, and so they have something to teach us. And I looked in my stories, I found them quickly, and I started looking for what they might teach us. And interestingly, the themes started sounding familiar. And even though the National Center for Health Statistics doesn't give us a list of the leading causes of life, SIUE has. And they're hanging on a banner over in the Goshen Lounge. By the way, one of the reasons why we hang the values up has to do with a point of intrinsic memory called priming. Priming is that long after words and concepts are forgotten, if you've been exposed to them frequently, when you hear them again and make associations, they continue to influence their life. So get ready. We're going to talk about the Siue values yet again. I'm going to share with you 3 short stories to illustrate Siue's contenders for the leading causes of life: openness, wisdom, integrity, citizenship, and I'll use the word community. It's a little bigger for me, and excellence. Story number 1, community and openness. A few years ago, I helped pull together a workshop for hospice nurses, and we invited family members to talk to us about what helps and what doesn't help. And on this panel was a mother and a father who brought home into hospice care their infant son. He was 6 months old. His name was Brian. Brian had a rare, untreatable neurological disorder, and the father and mother took care of him at home until the time of his death. The mother told the story through her tears, talked about the programmatic setup and what helped in the interdisciplinary team, and particularly one of the complexities of this child's care was that in order for him to be awake enough to experience the love of his parents, they had to lift the barbiturate dose to the point that intermittently he would have small seizures. She talked about how important it was that we helped her not fear that. Dad sat by quietly, a foot or a leg over his knee, kind of messing with his shoelace the whole time, until somebody asked him, "What helped you?" And he said, "Well, that people dared to visit." And he said, "I even remember some people who would hold Brian, and even if he had a seizure, they wouldn't pass him back. They simply held our baby." The father's observation speaks of the essential need we all have as human beings to belong, to the vital connections, life-giving connections of human community, no matter our status. The father knew at some level, and I think what he feared was a form of social death for his child, that people should fear him and not understand him to the point that they couldn't embrace his life. We are utterly dependent on each other for survival. And so when we talk about the E and we are one, that is no slogan. That is a profound understanding of the connections of human life. I also find it interesting that 3 years after the death of their child, that this simple act of community, a stranger sitting with a dying child, is remembered. The courage, attentiveness, and openness to that child's existence in that simple act did not go unnoticed. And that act, interestingly, is teaching several hundred people here today. Small things are breathtaking in their significance. Small decisions and acts make a big difference. How often do we pass off a good idea or a good cause and say, well, it's no big deal, or it doesn't really matter, or nobody will notice? Truth of the matter is, most of our world's pressing problems, be they economic, international, health, the health of our planet, are the product of billions of small acts that seem to have been no big deal. I'll recall for us Robert Kennedy's words, 1966, apartheid, South Africa. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage, that belief that human history is shaped. Each time one person stands up for an ideal, acts to improve the life of another, or strikes out against injustice, it sends forth tiny ripples of hope. And those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of resistance. Community and openness to others are not just important in themselves. They're important because they are the ground out of which hope arises. We can't live without hope. William Lynch, in his book called Images of Hope, reminds us hope is not some final exterior power that needs nothing but itself. Hope comes in signs, sometimes small signs, and always comes as an act of the community. William James, 19th century philosopher, indeed, help and hope are sisters. And so this might be a first commencement address in which you are sent off with this suggestion: think small, hold a baby, be open to the extraordinary power of the small stories in your own lives. Story 2, wisdom, integrity, and excellence. I once went to a conference and heard Christopher Reeves speak. It was on the topic of recovery from adversity and specifically on resilience. You remember Christopher Reeves, actor, 1995, kicked off a horse, and the resulting injury was that he was quadriplegic. He was starting to launch his foundation for spinal cord research. And in that, he was talking with great enthusiasm about these unprecedented possibilities for people with spinal cord injuries and talking in between his ventilator-assisted breaths about new hopes for cell grafts and spinal cord stimulation and regenerating neuronal connections, and particularly of his own dogged determination to be the first person with an injury of his significance to walk again. Then came the question from the interviewer, the audience, a person that probably was uncomfortable with such unbridled enthusiasm. And he said, but what if all of that doesn't happen in your lifetime, if you don't walk again? We waited for his response, expecting Mr. Reeves to double his determination or to give another testimony as to the power of believing in your goals, never giving up. And he paused, and he waited for his ventilator to deliver another breath. He smiled warmly, and he said, well then, I guess I won't. I've often wondered why his response gave me a sense of life. I believe it's because Mr. Reeves communicated the importance of devoting himself wholeheartedly to a purpose, a goal, a cause of life. At the very same time, he radiated a confidence in his ability to continue to find meaning in life if things didn't work out as he planned. Meaning in life does not depend on a particular outcome, but rather being committed to life in purpose in all things. That's wisdom. It takes wisdom to be patient with life, with theologian Henry Nouwen, who describes that as a willingness to stay where we are, live in a situation, live it out to its fullest, believing that something hidden there will manifest itself. Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, political science prof at Stanford, says she responds when students ask her, how did you get from college graduation to be the Secretary of State? And she said, well, first, you got to fail as a piano major. And then you just go on from there. Not all things in life, she says, are planned. Dare we believe that some of the best things in our life will happen in the parentheses, not the written scripts. To do so takes wisdom. In my nursing practice and stress management education, I've wondered enough about this quality of resilience that I've studied it. And one of the characteristics of resilient people is that they have a biphasic thought pattern, or a biphasic brain. Only in wisdom can you understand the paradox in these pairings. Proud but humble, self-concerned but altruistic, rebellious but cooperative, spiritual but irreverent. And we know that sometimes we win by losing. Wisdom is also a source of life because it helps us distinguish between wishful thinking and hope. Wishful thinking is the assumption that sooner or later things will get better. Hope is a virtue rooted in your commitment to life. Hope assures us that things will get better sooner than later if people of wisdom and integrity act. What also stayed with me about Christopher Reeves' response was how fully he embodied integrity. Responsible, assertive, purposeful, all the while sitting there, broken at the neck, frail-looking compared to his Superman self, dependent on a machine for every breath, but his whole amazing, intact personhood was bound up in his integrity. I didn't know what to say about excellence. I've had to learn lots of life lessons from the school of good enough. So I was helped unawares by a student. Just this Wednesday, I was sitting at the new bench out at the bus stop, waiting for the 16X to take me to St. Louis, and I saw a notebook that a student had forgotten. 8.5 by 11, cram-packed full of notes, dog-eared pages, but slid into the plastic cover on the top of a notebook was a message. It was in about 48 bold caps font. You couldn't miss it, and so I said, "This is for me." So I read it. The bus was coming, my hands were mittened, my pen was in the bottom of my book bag, but here's the gist. The mirror test. Every day you will be bombarded by tests of external measure, of excellence or success. But at the end of the day, the most important test that you can pass is to look in a mirror and ask yourself, did I do the best I could? That is the standard by which your excellence and your life is determined. The greatest enemy to life, actually, is to believe that you are not enough, that your worth is dependent on externals, that you are not beloved. This student, in her wisdom, knows that the message makes the messenger, and so she surrounds herself with a message to inspire her to personal integrity, wisdom, and meaningful excellence. Having illustrated now SIUE's leading causes of life, I want to add another, prompted by my recent work with service members returning from war. I'll call this one gratitude. One veteran in particular, who we describe in the book, Vietnam War vet, 30 years long searching for peace, striving for wholeness and recovery from his traumatic injury, anger, self-medication. And he said this, my whole life since the war, I have been struggling to survive using all sorts of coping mechanisms. You gotta learn to forgive yourself. You gotta let it go. Get over it, man. Then one day, in working the 12 steps, I think it was the one about forgiveness, something clicked. I realized that there are things that come free of charge, without my effort. Some things that you just can't do for yourself, that somebody else can do for you. And at that moment, I surrendered, which is no small word for a Marine, to the belief that my life is worth something. And being grateful for that life has changed my life. If those Marines' words are not eloquent enough, Henry Nouwen adds, when we keep claiming the light, we will find ourselves becoming more radiant. When we persist in looking at the shadow side, we will eventually end up in the shadows, in the dark. Every time we decide to be grateful, it will be easier to see new things to be grateful for. Gratitude begets gratitude. Today is a day of gratitude. The Chancellor has offered students for you to say that you know you didn't do this yourself. And I know I can speak for the faculty, the staff administrators at SIU, and say we too are pulled into our futures by small signs of hope, and you are that hope for us. Thank you for your willingness to learn with us, to live with us for a while, and to be signs of hope for us. You are the nation's future, and for that we are grateful. Now, it may seem that I've just said, think small, admit defeat, give up on some things. Pretty good is good enough. Don't try so hard. Say thanks. But I only dare say those things, believing that you have the wisdom to have developed a biphasic brain. You are now primed to live boldly, consistently, urgently in a world that desperately needs you to hold the baby, to offer hope and life in all of the communities, large or small, that you find yourself. We hope that the values at SIUE continue to live in your life, first as your relationship to us as alumni, but also in your memory and in your imagination. With the poet Samuel Coleridge, who defines imagination not as a flight of fancy, but as a high kind of seeing. Nothing good can happen in your life unless you first imagine it. You have the character and education to imagine a real future. Never stop imagining. With your imagination, you will be able to see a good that is not yet there. You will see your way out of difficult situations and envision a wider perspective for your thought and your life. With your imagination, you will see the world as it could be and your part in making it better. With Barbara Klingsolver in Animal Dreams, the least you can do in your life is to figure out what you hope for, and the best you can do is to live inside that hope. We hope for you a good life. Thank you.